Now, his assets, Janet said, flipping pages. His 401k has approximately $180,000. Personal savings, $12,000. Stock portfolio worth about $35,000. That's it. His BMW is leased, not owned. His expensive suits, golf clubs, country club membership, all lifestyle expenses, not assets. He's been living paycheck to paycheck despite his six-figure salary. The irony was staggering. Marcus, who made twice what I did in salary, had virtually no net worth because he spent everything maintaining his image. What about his affair? Washington is a no-fault divorce state, so infidelity doesn't typically affect property division. However, if he's been spending marital funds on his affair, we can potentially recover those as dissipation of marital assets. I pulled out my own folder. I've been tracking unusual expenses for 8 months. Hotel charges that don't correspond to business travel, expensive dinners at restaurants we've never been to, jewelry purchases I never received. Janet raised an eyebrow, flipping through my documentation. You've been thorough? I worked in accounting before real estate. Old habits? This is excellent work. Sarah, we're looking at approximately $18,000 in questionable expenses. By the time I left Janae's office, I felt like a general who'd just reviewed her battle plan with her most trusted advisor. That evening, I met my sister Emma at our favorite cafe in Pike Place Market. At 35, Emma was a high marketing executive who'd never liked Marcus, though she'd been too polite to say so until recently. So he finally asked for the divorce, Emma said as we settled into a corner booth. Last night, exactly like we predicted, he wants to split everything 50-50 and sell the house. Emma nearly choked on her latte. He wants to sell your house? The one you bought with Grandma's money? The very one. He also wants his golf buddy to handle the legal work to keep things simple. Please tell me you didn't agree to use his attorney. Of course not. I met with Janet this morning. Everything's in place. Emma leaned back, shaking her head. I still can't believe he doesn't know the house is in your name only. How is that possible? He never paid attention to paperwork. I handled all household finances. He just assumed everything acquired during marriage was automatically joint property and your rental properties. He thinks they're just a hobby that breaks even. He has no idea how much they're worth or how much income they generate. Emma raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. To Marcus, the man who's about to get the shock of his life. That evening, I returned home to find Marcus in an unusually good mood. Actually cooking dinner, something he hadn't done in over a year. Smells good, I said, setting my purse down. Thought we should have a nice dinner together before things get complicated with lawyers and paperwork? We ate dinner making small talk, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. I called Richard today, Marcus said as we finished. He can have the initial paperwork ready by Friday. Said it should be straightforward given that we're both being reasonable. That's good, I replied. Janet said she'd need a few days to review everything as well. Janet, I thought you were going to use someone less expensive. We don't need a big-shot attorney for a simple divorce. I looked at my husband across the table, really looked at him. Even now, he was trying to control the situation, minimize my preparation, keep me at a disadvantage. She's not that expensive, I said, and I want to make sure I understand what I'm agreeing to. Marcus reached across and took my hand. Sarah, you know I'd never try to take advantage of you, right? We're both going to be fine. You'll get your half of everything. I'll get mine, and we can both move on. I squeezed his hand and smiled. I know, Marcus. I trust that everything will work out exactly as it should. Chapter 3. Revelations. Friday afternoon arrived with typical Seattle drizzle. I sat in the conference room at Janet's office, watching raindrops race down the floor-to-ceiling windows while we waited for Marcus and his attorney. Remember, Janet said, arranging documents on the polished table, let them present their proposal first. Don't react, don't correct assumptions, just listen. I nodded, smoothing my navy blue dress. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, but not intimidating, reinforcing Marcus's perception of me as the agreeable wife who wouldn't cause trouble. At exactly 2 o'clock, Marcus arrived with Richard Harrison. Richard looked exactly like what he was, a country club lawyer in an expensive suit who probably handled more golf handicaps than legal briefs. Sarah, good to see you again, Richard said, extending his hand. We'd met at several company parties over the years. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances, but I'm sure we can work everything out amicably. Marcus took a seat across from me, flashing his most charming smile. Thanks for being so reasonable about this, Sarah. I want what's best for both of us, I replied, which was absolutely true, though probably not in the way he interpreted it. Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. I've prepared a preliminary settlement agreement based on Marcus's information. Fairly straightforward 50-50 division of all marital assets. He slid a copy to Janet, who began reviewing with practiced efficiency. Her expression remained neutral, though I caught the slightest twitch at her mouth's corner. Let's walk through this, Richard continued. The primary residence at 1247 Queen Anne Avenue, purchased during marriage for $485,000, current estimated value $750,000. After paying off the mortgage and selling costs, net proceeds of approximately $480,000 to be split equally. I folded my hands and said nothing, though my heart was racing. There was no mortgage on the house. I'd paid it off 3 years ago with rental property profits, Marcus's 401k, and investment accounts. Total $227,000 to be split equally. Joint savings and checking accounts, approximately $12,000, also split equally. Janet looked up from the documents. I don't see any mention of Mrs. Patterson's separate property or business interests. Richard looked confused. Marcus indicated that Sarah doesn't have any significant separate assets. She has some small rental properties, but my understanding is they barely break even. I see, Janet said smoothly. And what about Mr. Patterson's personal expenses over the past 8 months? The hotel charges, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Those are business expenses and personal purchases. I don't see how they're relevant. Business expenses, Janet repeated. Would those be the hotel charges that don't correspond to your actual business travel? Or perhaps the jewelry purchases that weren't given to your wife? The color drained from Marcus's face. Richard looked between his client and Janet with growing confusion. I'm not sure what you're implying, Richard said. I'm not implying anything, Janet replied. I'm stating that Mr. Patterson has spent approximately $18,000 of marital funds on his extramarital affair over the past 8 months. We have documentation of every expense. Marcus opened his mouth, but Richard held up a hand to stop him. Let's table that issue and focus on property division. Excellent idea, Janet said. She opened her briefcase and pulled out different documents. However, I think there may be some misunderstandings about the marital estate. She slid a document across to Richard. This is the deed to the residence at 1247 Queen Anne Avenue. As you can see, it's registered solely in Sarah Mitchell's name. Ms. Mitchell purchased the property with funds from her premarital inheritance and investments. Richard's confident expression began to crack as he studied the deed. This can't be right. Marcus, you said the house was joint property? I thought it was, Marcus stammered. We've been living there together for 8 years. I pay half the expenses. Paying household expenses doesn't create an ownership interest, Janet explained patiently, particularly when the deed is in only one name and the purchase was funded entirely by separate property. She slid another document across. This is Ms. Mitchell's current property portfolio. 3 rental properties, all purchased in her name, only all funded through her separate property and business income. Richard was frantically flipping through pages, his country club confidence evaporating. The total value of these properties is $1.2 million in current market value, Janet confirmed, with net equity of approximately $520,000. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The Seattle rain drummed against the windows of our Victorian home in Queen Anne, each drop echoing the hollow rhythm of my marriage. I sat at the mahogany dining table, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother, watching my husband of 12 years pace across the hardwood floors. His designer shoes clicked with each step, a sound that had once brought comfort but now felt like nails on a chalkboard. Sarah, we need to talk, Marcus finally said, his voice carrying that tone I'd recognized over the past 6 months, the one he used when delivering news he thought would devastate me. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing my latest real estate acquisition. At 38, I'd built a modest but successful property investment portfolio, something Marcus had always dismissed as playing house with other people's money. Of course, I replied, closing the laptop gently. What's on your mind? He stopped pacing and faced me, his perfectly styled hair catching the dim light from the vintage chandelier. Marcus had always been handsome in that corporate executive way, sharp suits, confident smile, the kind of man who commanded attention in boardrooms. I think we both know this isn't working anymore, he began, gesturing as if pulling words from the air. We're like roommates, Sarah. We haven't been happy for months. I nodded slowly, my fingers tracing the edge of my coffee mug. You're not wrong. His eyebrows shot up. He'd clearly expected tears, pleading, maybe anger. Instead, I sat there with the calm of someone who had seen this moment coming from miles away. I've been thinking the same thing, I continued steadily. We've grown apart. Marcus, you work late most nights, weekend golf with clients, business trips every month. When you are here, you're always on your phone. Exactly. He seemed relieved. You get it? We're both successful, independent people. We don't need to drag this out and make it messy. I almost smiled. If only he knew how prepared I was for this conversation. So what are you proposing? I asked, though I already knew. Divorce. Clean. Simple. No fault. We split everything 50-50. Sell the house and start fresh. He sat across from me, leaning forward. We can have the papers drawn up by my attorney, Richard Harrison. You remember him? Golf buddy. He'll make sure everything's fair. Richard Harrison. Of course he'd already thought this through. Probably discussed it over drinks at the country club. I wondered how long he'd been planning this speech, rehearsing it during those long drives home from work. That sounds reasonable, I said, surprising him again, though I think I'll use my own attorney. You know, to make sure I understand everything properly. Sure, whatever makes you comfortable. He was practically beaming, probably thinking about his 25-year-old assistant Jessica, whom he'd been working late with for the past 8 months. Yes, I knew about Jessica. I'd known since day one. When were you thinking of starting the process? If we're both on the same page, maybe next week, get the ball rolling before the holidays. Fresh start in the new year. How poetic. I nodded and sipped my coffee, watching the Seattle skyline through our large windows. The Space Needle stood tall in the distance, surrounded by the bustling downtown where Marcus worked his 60-hour weeks at Patterson and Associates. There's one thing, though, Marcus said, his tone shifting. I know this house means a lot to you, your grandmother, and all that. But realistically, neither of us can afford to keep it alone. The mortgage, property taxes, maintenance. It's a two-income situation. I looked around the living room visible from where we sat. The exposed brick walls, original crown molding, built-in bookshelves filled with first editions I'd collected over the years. This house had been my sanctuary, my project, my pride and joy for 8 years. You're probably right, I said softly. It is a big house for one person. I'm glad you're being so mature about this, Sarah. A lot of couples make divorce harder than it needs to be. He reached across and squeezed my hand. We can both walk away with our dignity intact. Dignity. Rich coming from someone who'd been having an affair for 8 months and thought I was too naive to notice. After he went upstairs probably to call Jessica with the good news, I sat alone, finishing my wine and looking at the stack of mail, property tax bills, insurance statements, utility bills, all addressed to Sarah Mitchell, my maiden name, which I'd kept for business purposes. Marcus had never paid attention to the paperwork side of our life. He made the money. I managed household, finances, and investments. It was an arrangement that had worked well for both of us, though I suspected he was about to discover just how well it had worked for me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my attorney's contact. Janet Morrison had been handling my real estate transactions for 5 years. She was sharp, thorough, and had an excellent reputation. More importantly, she'd been expecting my call. Janet, it's Sarah. He just asked for the divorce. How did he take your response? Exactly as we expected. He's already planning to have his golf buddy handle the paperwork and the house. I looked around one more time, taking in every detail of the home I'd carefully restored and loved for nearly a decade. He wants to sell it. Split everything 50-50. Oh, this is going to be interesting, Janet said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Are you ready for tomorrow's meeting? More than ready, I replied. It's time we learned what happens when you underestimate your wife. Chapter 2. The Art of Preparation. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. One of those rare December days in Seattle when the sun actually appeared. I was already dressed and having my second cup of coffee when Marcus stumbled downstairs in his bathrobe. You're up early, he mumbled, heading for the coffee machine. Couldn't sleep, I said, which wasn't entirely true. I'd slept better than I had in months, finally knowing the waiting was over. I have a meeting with my attorney this morning. That was fast. He poured his coffee and leaned against the granite countertop. I told you, Richard can handle everything. We don't need to make this complicated. After Marcus left for work in his BMW, a lease I'd been paying for through our joint account, I drove to Janet's office in Belleville. The contrast wasn't lost on me. While Marcus spent money on appearances, I'd been quietly building assets. Janet Morrison's office occupied the 20th floor of a sleek, downtown building with views of Elliott Bay. At 52, she was everything I aspired to: be confident, successful, and nobody's fool. Sarah, come in, she said, gesturing to the leather chairs. How are you feeling? Honestly, relieved. The hard part was waiting for him to make the first move, and he has no idea what he's walking into. I shook my head. Marcus has always seen me as the supportive wife who handles boring household stuff while he focuses on his career. He thinks I'm just a real estate hobbyist. Janet pulled out a thick file folder. Let's review what we're working with. She spread several documents across her desk, and I felt satisfaction seeing my careful planning laid out in black and white. First, the house. Janet began. Purchased 8 years ago for $485,000. Current market value approximately $750,000. Deed registered solely in your name. Purchased with funds from your inheritance and premarital investments. Marcus insisted we didn't need to add his name, since he wasn't contributing to the down payment. I said he was focused on his career and said real estate was my thing. His mistake. Next, your rental properties. Janet flipped to another document. The duplex in Fremont, the condo in Ballard, the townhouse in Capitol Hill, all purchased in your name only, all generating positive cash flow, all of which he dismissed as small potatoes compared to his salary. Current combined value of your rental portfolio, approximately $1.2 million. Outstanding mortgages, $680,000. Net equity, $520,000, not including cash flow. I'd been systematic about building my portfolio, using profits from each property to fund the next purchase. While Marcus spent bonuses on luxury cars and golf memberships, I'd been creating passive income streams. Now, your business accounts, Janet continued. Your property management company, Mitchell Real Estate Holdings. This was what Marcus knew least about. He'd seen me playing around with rentals, but never understood the scope. Annual revenue? From property management fees and rental income. $127,000. Net profit last year $72 and growing every year. I added, I just signed 2 new clients. So in summary, your personal assets include the primary residence worth $750,000, a rental portfolio worth $1.2 million, a profitable business, and approximately $95,000 in savings, all in your name only. What about joint accounts? Joint checking has $3,200. Joint savings has $8,500. Hardly significant compared to your individual assets. I nodded. It had been deliberate strategy to keep joint accounts minimal. Marcus's paychecks went to his personal account, from which he'd transfer his half of household expenses. My property income went directly to my business accounts. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Sarah, I had no idea you had this much in real estate. You never asked, I said quietly. Every time I tried to talk about my investments, you called them my little hobby, Janet continued. Her methodical destruction of Richard's assumptions. Ms. Mitchell also owns and operates Mitchell Real Estate Holdings, a property management company that generated $78,000 in net profit last year. This is impossible, Marcus said, his voice rising. Sarah doesn't make that kind of money. She's never made more than $40,000 a year. In salary? No, I said. But rental income and property management fees aren't salary. Marcus, their business income. The room fell silent except for Richard furiously scribbling notes. Finally, he looked up at Janet. What exactly is your client seeking in this divorce? Ms. Mitchell is seeking to retain her separate property, the residence, and rental properties she owned prior to marriage or acquired with separate funds during marriage. She's also seeking reimbursement for the $18,000 in marital funds that Mr. Patterson spent on his affair. And what is she offering Mr. Patterson? 50% of the actual marital property, the joint checking and savings accounts, which total approximately $11,700. She's also willing to let him keep his 401k and investment accounts intact, rather than claiming her community property share. Marcus was doing the math, and I could see the moment he realized what this meant. Instead of walking away with nearly $400,000 as he'd expected, he was looking at less than $6,000 plus his existing retirement accounts. This is ridiculous, he exploded. Sarah, we were married for 12 years. You can't just cut me out of everything. I'm not cutting you out of anything that's actually ours together, I said calmly. But I'm also not giving you half of assets. I built independently. You built them during our marriage. I supported you, encouraged you. I almost laughed. Marcus, you told me last week that my real estate investments were playing house with other people's money. You've never supported my business? You've barely acknowledged it exists. Richard was frantically whispering with his client, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Finally, he cleared his throat. We'll need time to review these documents and reassess. Of course, Janet said, graciously. Take all the time you need. Miss Mitchell is in no hurry. As we prepared to leave, Marcus grabbed my arm. Sarah, wait, can we talk privately? I looked at Janet, who nodded. We'll be right outside. When the door closed, Marcus slumped in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. How long have you known? He asked. About Jessica. 8 months. He winced. Why didn't you say anything? What was I supposed to say, Marcus? Please stop cheating on me and remember that you have a wife. You made your choices. I never meant for this to happen. It just ... It got complicated. No, it got simple, I said. You decided you wanted something else, and you took it. You just thought you could have it all without consequences. What do you want me to do? End it with Jessica. Come home. We can work this out. I studied his face, looking for any sign of the man I'd fallen in love with 13 years ago. All I saw was panic and calculation. It's too late for that, Marcus. Even if I could trust you again, which I can't, we want different things. You want a wife who'll admire your success and look the other way when you stray? I want a partner who sees me as an equal. I do see you as an equal. No, you don't. You see me as the woman who manages the household while you handle the important stuff. You didn't even know I owned our house. Marcus, after 8 years of living there, you had no idea whose name was on the deed. He was quiet for a long moment. So what happens now? Now you decide whether you want to accept Janet's proposal or drag this out in court, where you'll spend more on legal fees than you'll ever get in settlement money. I walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, I hope you and Jessica are happy together. I really do. But you're going to have to build that happiness on your own foundation, not on the one I spent 12 years creating. Chapter for new foundation. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my Victorian home, watching the spring rain fall on the gardens I'd spent years cultivating. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. Exactly as Janet had predicted, Marcus had ultimately accepted our settlement offer rather than face the humiliation and expense of a court battle he couldn't win. The house felt different now, lighter somehow. as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. I'd kept all the original fixtures and architectural details that made the house special, but I'd also made changes. The master bedroom had been completely redecorated, and I'd converted Marcus's home office into a proper workspace for my growing property. Management business. Emma knocked on the front door at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying champagne and wearing a grin that could have powered the Space Needle. "How does it feel to be officially free?" she asked, enveloping me in a hug. "Honestly, terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." We settled in the living room with our champagne, and I caught Emma up on the latest developments. Mitchell Real Estate Holdings had grown to manage 15 properties for various clients, and I was considering hiring my first employee. The rental income from my own properties had increased as well, thanks to Seattle's booming housing market. "What about Marcus?" Emma asked. "Have you heard anything?" Janet mentioned that he and Jessica moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Bellevue. Apparently, his lifestyle was more expensive than his actual income could support long-term. "Karma's a beautiful thing," Emma said, raising her glass. The doorbell rang, interrupting our celebration. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found a delivery woman holding a large bouquet. "Sarah Mitchell, that's me." I signed for the flowers and brought them inside, puzzled. The card was from David Chen, the owner of the Capitol Hill townhouse I managed for him. "Congratulations on your divorce, and thank you for the excellent property management," Picard read. "Looking forward to working with you on the new duplex project." David. Emma read the card over my shoulder. New duplex project. I'd been negotiating with David for weeks about a joint investment opportunity. He wanted to purchase and renovate a duplex in the University District, and I would manage the property in exchange for a 20% ownership stake. "It's a partnership deal," I explained. "David handles the purchase and renovation financing. I oversee the project and manage the rental once it's complete." "That's huge. Sarah, you're becoming a real estate mogul." "I'm becoming financially independent," I corrected. "There's a difference." Over dinner, Emma and I talked about the future. For the first time in years, I felt like I could make plans, without having to consider someone else's career, ego, or priorities. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Jessica stood on my front porch, looking nervous and much younger than her 25 years. "Mrs. Patterson, Ms. Mitchell, could I talk to you for a minute?" I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. "Would you like to come in?" She followed me into the living room, clearly uncomfortable. She was pretty in that generic way that 25-year-olds often are. Blonde highlights, trendy clothes, uncertain confidence. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for the affair, for breaking up your marriage. I know it was wrong." "Why are you here, Jessica?" She looked around the room, taking in the elegant furnishings and artwork. "Marcus told me you got everything in the divorce. The house, the rental properties, the business. He said you'd been hiding assets." "I wasn't hiding anything. I was building something while he was distracted by other priorities. These things are difficult for him right now. Financially, the apartment is expensive, and his salary doesn't go as far as he thought it would." I studied her face, seeing the dawning realization that her older, successful boyfriend wasn't quite as successful as she'd believed. "What exactly are you asking me, Jessica?" "I don't know. I guess," I thought, "maybe you could help him somehow. Give him some of the rental properties, or let him stay in the house until he gets back on his feet." The audacity was breathtaking. "You want me to financially support the man who cheated on me so that you two can have an easier life together? When you put it like that, it sounds awful." "It is awful, Jessica. I spent 12 years building these assets while being a supportive wife to a man who ultimately chose someone else. Why would I now give him half of what I built so he can be with the woman he chose over me?" She had no answer for that. "Can I give you some advice?" I asked. "Don't build your future on someone else's foundation. If you and Marcus want to be together, build something together, but don't expect me to subsidize it." After Jessica left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, thinking about the strange trajectory that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been the accommodating wife who managed the household while her husband built his career. Now I was a divorced businesswoman with a growing real estate portfolio and complete control over my own destiny. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was David Chen. "Sarah, I have great news about the University District project. The seller accepted our offer. We can close next month." "That's wonderful. David, when do you want to start the renovation planning?" "How about Monday? I'd like to walk through the property with you and discuss the scope of work." After we hung up, I made a list of everything I needed to accomplish in the coming weeks. Interview potential employees, finalize the duplex partnership, review applications for 2 rental properties that would be vacant next month, and attend a real estate investors meeting where I'd been asked to speak about property management. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had always been the one giving presentations, commanding attention in conference rooms, building his professional reputation. Now I was the one being recognized as an expert in my field. 3 months later, I stood in the conference room of the Westin Seattle. addressing a group of 50 real estate investors at the monthly Pacific Northwest Real Estate Alliance meeting. My presentation was titled Building Wealth Through Strategic Property Management, and the audience was genuinely engaged, asking thoughtful questions about cash flow analysis and tenant screening. The key, I explained, is to think long-term and reinvest your profits strategically. Every dollar of rental income that you don't need for living expenses should be working toward your next investment. After the presentation, several people approached me with business cards and partnership proposals. I'd become exactly what Marcus had always claimed to be: a successful, respected professional whose expertise was sought after by others. Emma met me for a late dinner after the event. "You were amazing up there," she said as we settled into our booth at a downtown restaurant. "I'm so proud of how far you've come." "It's been quite a year," I admitted. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life now." "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. "About the divorce? No. About staying married as long as I did. Sometimes I could have been building this business without distractions for the past few years." "But would you have had the motivation to become financially independent if you hadn't experienced betrayal?" She had a point. My drive to build assets and create security had intensified after I discovered Marcus's affair. Knowing I couldn't rely on anyone else had pushed me to become more ambitious and strategic. "What about Marcus?" Emma asked. "Do you ever hear from him?" "He sends emails every few months asking for money or help with something." I don't respond. And Jessica. They broke up about 3 months after the divorce was final. Apparently she wasn't as interested in struggling financially as she was in dating a successful older man. Emma raised her wine glass. "To Sarah Mitchell, real estate mogul and woman who plays the long game better than anyone I know." As we clinked glasses, I thought about the title of this story: how I'd accepted the divorce peacefully, while Marcus had no idea what he was walking away from. He'd seen me as the quiet, supportive wife who would be grateful for whatever settlement he offered. Instead, he'd encountered a businesswoman who'd been preparing for independence long before he asked for a divorce. The truth was, I had accepted the divorce peacefully. But peace, I'd learned, doesn't mean passive acceptance. Sometimes peace means having the strength and preparation to let someone walk away from something they never deserved in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Construction crew starts Monday on the duplex. This is going to be our most profitable project yet." I smiled, looking out the restaurant window at the Seattle skyline. The city lights reflected off Elliott Bay, and the Space Needle stood illuminated against the night sky. This was my city now, my territory, my empire built one property at a time. Marcus had wanted a fresh start in the new year. As it turned out, we'd both gotten exactly what we asked for. The difference was, I'd been building toward my fresh start for years before he ever knew he wanted one. The house had been in my name all along. But more importantly, so had my future.